As we were just discussing, Rishi Sunak's front bench has suffered yet another blow. Robert Jenrick has quit as immigration minister in a spat over the Rwanda plan, or lack of it. And for context, Rwanda Bill, the Home Secretary he fired last month, dialed up the drama in her statement to the Commons earlier. It's really not been a good day for Rishi.
All of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, comes down to a simple question. Who governs Britain? Where does ultimate authority for the UK lie? Is it with the British people and their elected representatives? Or is it in the vague, shifting and unaccountable concept of international law? On Monday, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister announced measures that start to better reflect public frustration on legal migration. He can now follow that up with a bill that reflects public fury on illegal migration and actually stop the boats. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is now or never.
I feel like bursting into song. Joining us now to discuss this, we've got the Telegraph columnist and parliamentary sketch writer Madeline Grant, Director of Communications for the Henry Jackson Society, Megan Gittos, and journalist Stephen Edgington from the Telegraph as well. Thanks to all of you for coming in. Who is running the country? I'd quite like to know the answer to that. We now don't have an immigration minister, even as, you know, immigration is the top of the agenda for everything. What's going on?
Absolute chaos, as usual. Just another day in the Conservative Party.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, this is very, very, very chaotic and just looks terrible because, you know, when this position is filled, and even if they are able to have some success, if by some miracle they're able to meet some of the objections to the Rwanda plan and this new piece of legislation, even if that is carried off, there is just always this whiff of chaos and acrimony emanating from the Conservative Party.
I mean, they seem to have taken a rather poor idea and sort of watered it down. You know, the legislation that they're seemingly trying to push through is full of exceptions and, you know, people being sent back to Britain after being sent to Rwanda. I mean, it's all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't remember which one, but an MP talking on Times Radio earlier that said it's been watered down because they do think it's most likely to pass and they can't risk losing Rwanda on their side of the deal. But I think Robert Jenrick...
Well, then it won't be any good, though, will it, if it's watered down?
I just don't think the plan's... Personally, I don't think it's very good anyway.
Right.
It's a watered-down immigration plan as it is. It's not actually going to be responsible for an awful lot of migrants for how much it's actually going to cost. Robert Jenrick resigning, they need to have a stronger stomach. This issue isn't going away.
No.
And if they only have the Rwanda plan, then what's their plan for the other 35,000 small boats every year that aren't going to be going
Well,
to
that's
Rwanda?
the problem, Steve, isn't it? I mean, we've got this government who seemingly are obsessed with making something happen in Rwanda. I'm not sure they even know what that something is. And even if it does work, there are only going to be a few hundred people going there, and half of them apparently will come back.
Well, I think the problem that Rishi has is that he staked his entire political reputation on so-called stopping the boats.
Yeah.
This was part of his sort of 5 pledges that he made when he first became Prime Minister. And he's clearly failed to do that. And I think that this legislation, clearly many Conservative MPs feel that it doesn't go far enough. There are some Conservative MPs, of course, who are concerned about breaking so-called international law. And that's the reason that Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly can't go further, is because of these concerns from those Conservative MPs on the left of the party who say that we must abide by international law and regulations. But I think, you know, a common sense approach would see us stopping the boats and doing whatever it takes, as Robert Jenrick said. And he's not actually, historically, he hasn't been seen as a very right-wing Conservative MP. He's been sort of more moderate, very much a supporter of Rishi Sunak, a loyalist. So it really is extraordinary that he has resigned today. Suella Braverman, you could argue, maybe she's lining us up for a leadership contest next year. But Robert Jenrick, I mean, this is pretty extraordinary stuff.
It really is. I mean, David Cameron's now on the right of the Conservative Party, isn't he, compared to some of these MPs in the backbenches who were saying, we mustn't break international law. I mean, do they not know what their constituents think? Do they not want to know?
Yeah. And also when, you know, David Cameron was Prime Minister of this country, on occasion we did ignore pronouncements from the ECHR on things like prisoner voting rights. So, you know, it has been done. And there's plenty of other countries in Europe, for instance, that, you know, their judges will take a much looser view of these pronouncements and will sometimes ignore it when it suits them. Denmark has done this before, and so have many other countries. So it's not beyond the wit of man. I think what it needs is a political will that is really, really lacking. But I think Stephen is very right to raise that point about how there are, these two cohorts of MPs that want totally different things. In the chamber, as Suella Braverman was delivering her statement, that was very obvious.
Yes.
There were quite a few MPs nodding vigorously as she spoke, and also quite a large number who were looking pretty disgusted, scoffing and shaking their heads.
Yeah. Well, I
mean, how you find a policy platform that can bridge that
Right.
that divide is going to be very, very difficult.
Because I couldn't work out when she said that they were facing electoral oblivion and there was a sort of a cheer that went up. I was like, is that coming from the Tories or the Labour benches? I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't tell.
Also,
Put us out of our misery.
Right.
I found it quite amusing that she said that, because I did want to say, open your eyes. And that's coming. That oblivion is happening. The people the 200 seats that they're predicting the Tories are going to remain, or about 190, they're relatively safe. So the oblivion that's going to happen has already been secured.
Right.
I think that, the point you make about the party being really split, it's so terribly split, and I just think they need to get the election out of the way now, because they're not going to find unity at this stage.
No.
This issue's not going away.
It's just going to get worse, isn't it?
It's going to get worse for every country. This is an election winner or loser in every country. And
But that's the interesting thing, because in Europe, Steve, there's sort of countries which had been relatively lax about immigration, like France, like Italy, like Germany, and they're all kind of turning, and they're all going, we can't keep this up. We can't allow all these people. They've suddenly reinvented a border, I'm told, between France and Italy. Germany has said they're not taking any more refugees coming from Italy. And the Italians are going, we can't keep taking all these refugees from North Africa. So, Britain, once again, is kind of standing alone, but in the wrong place.
I think the difference between Britain and many countries on the continent is that there are strong populist right-wing parties in Europe that are really applying pressure to the mainstream governments and parties of those countries. Whereas, unfortunately, in Britain, there is, obviously, we've got the Reform Party, but I think they're pretty weak if you compare them to Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, for example, his election recently, in Sweden, in Germany, and in France, you mentioned Le Pen is doing very well in the opinion polls. So I think there's a lot of pressure on those governments to tackle this issue, and that's not the same in the UK at the moment. And if you look at French, let's say, if you look at legal migration, compare legal migration to France and Britain. France has around 200,000, just below. We have 745,000. It's absolutely extraordinary. And the Conservatives want to pretend that this is just an inevitable thing, that we must have almost 1 million people coming to the country every year. We do not need to do this. Other European countries France is bigger than us, and they take far, far less people.
Well, back in 2019, we were only taking 200,000, and they managed to sort of, more than triple it since they got into office, having said they were going to get it down. So there's something going on, it seems to me, whether it's been run by the Treasury, whether it's people who think that because they're running universities, they should bring in all these students because that's where the money is. I mean, there's obviously multiple reasons why immigration is a problem.
Yeah. There's many different areas. Universities is one. And actually, it was Boris Johnson who really opened the floodgates when it came to that. And actually, in Rishi Sunak's defence, he has now changed the rules that prevent people from bringing in their dependents, which I'm sure most people weren't even aware was possible.
I think this year was the first time I worked that out.
When I went to university, I didn't bring half my family with me.
No.
It's
you went to get away from them, didn't you?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, there were actually...
I don't mean your particular family, but, I mean, I went to... I was the first thing you do is you go and live away from home for the first time. And if it's a different country, you still don't take people with you.
Yeah. There are lots of universities that are not of a very high academic standard that have these campuses in London, even if they are based elsewhere in the UK. And these have basically become places where, to bring up the numbers, people can go with very little in the way of academic credentials. And then all they have to do is work for a few years in the UK and they can qualify for a visa.
Right.
There's all sorts of routes.
Many of them are now, because we were told this, I think, when the figures came out just the other day, one of the reasons why it's as high as it is that more people are staying on after they finish their course, and they give them permission to stay for 2, sometimes 3 years.
Yeah, they are. They all came as a surprise to me, especially the dependence part of it. But I think we've got to get to grips with the numbers. That's obvious. It is, as you say, the number says it's nearly 1 million a year, and that is... So by the time we finish talking about the Rwanda plan, we're already at 500,000. And there's a place for immigration, and it's so beneficial to society, especially putting people in jobs in public services, but
the kind of immigration we've got, yeah. But I think that's the trouble is that people say that as though it's all good, but this kind of immigration isn't all good, And I've lived in London, was born in London a very long time ago, and it's a very different city now. It's completely different, and so the kind of immigration that's happening, I would argue, is not actually beneficial at all.
Not on this level, not when there's no integration strategy. No, there's no strategy at all in social cohesion, integration, and at these numbers, it's just we're constantly doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And it's just, there's just such a stretch on anything that people rely on, school, housing, and if you don't have an infrastructure strategy, social cohesion strategy, and integration strategy, then we can't be shocked that this is the result of things.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say even if you have a good strategy, historically, there aren't many countries around the world that have successfully integrated that many people in such a short space of time.
No, you're right.
It's very, very difficult to do. You're more likely to achieve it if you keep the numbers at a manageable level that the population of the country is actually comfortable with.
And it is a world problem, isn't it? I mean, I've mentioned this several times, that over in America, they've got a massive illegal migration problem, and there are people being flown to Central America from Africa to then enter America illegally in Tijuana, which is incredible. It's such a business now.
Well, unfortunately, when you start importing people from places where there are significant ethnic conflicts and their cultures are completely different and their values are completely different to those in Western countries, then you import their problems with them. And I think, as you rightly mentioned, in America and Britain and all across Western Europe, we've seen hundreds of thousands, millions of people from Africa and Asia coming to these countries and causing all sorts of issues for the local people, not just in economic terms. And I think, Britain in the 1990s had a net migration of 50,000 a year, and we survived just okay. Recently, unfortunately, big businesses have over-relied on cheap labour from all around the world, and I think we need to get off that sort of,
it's
drug.
It's a sort of addiction that we need to break, isn't it? That's the thing.
It's politicians also very much at fault here, because let's say that you have a problem, say, in the social care sector or in the NHS or in universities which are struggling for funding. In the short term, it makes a lot of sense for departments to lobby for these kinds of numbers, and perhaps financially it might be the right decision in the short term. However, it's very much a sticking plaster solution, because if you depend on cheap labour for social care, you haven't got to the bottom of the shortage in UK workers, and one day those people who are working in social care will one day require their own social care, and that will require more migrants to pay for their needs.
Yeah, it really is. It's a hiding to nothing. But thank you, guys. I know we're going to have you back later on to have a look at the papers of what's going on there. But this problem is not going away. We've been highlighting it for a very long time here at the Independent Republic of Mike Graham.